Y'all may be seated. The liturgy, the way that we order our worship, is kind of like a home. And with our own homes, you can grow really familiar with ones you've been living in for a while. And we've got this new liturgy that we're debuting today that Jim Gauthier has written for us, and I've kind of likened it to like moving into a new home. You know, things are kind of familiar, but a little bit unfamiliar. You look at this light switch on the wall, and you wonder what that does, what's going on there as well. So thank you for leaning into this opportunity. And thank you, Jim and the praise band, for leading this worship and celebrate with us. Appreciate y'all. An ice cream store has opened across the street. I don't know if y'all have noticed this. And it's not lost on me that it's opened while we're doing a series on temptation, okay? One of y'all tagged me while you went over there on their opening day, and I thank you for thinking of me when you eat ice cream. So it's kind of a neat thing. Y'all go over and visit the Sugar Fine Creamery and get you a little cone if you want to. Our boys have just discovered the whole world of Super Mario Kart. A lot of y'all are familiar with that. My brother loaned them his Nintendo Wii several months ago, and Susan and I thought that we would get the Super Mario Kart game and then the controllers that come with it as a Christmas gift, and it has been nothing but Super Mario Kart for weeks since Christmas in our house. And for those of you who don't know what Super Mario Kart is, where have you been for the last 2 decades, right? It has been around a while. And this fun driving game uses the controller and follows your actions to play the game. So you have this little game controller, you pop it into this little steering wheel, and as you're playing the game figures out your actions. And if you turn left, your little character goes left in this racing game. And if you turn right, the little character goes right. And the boys figured out, they taught us, that if you flip the controller back, your little character does a wheelie while it's going down the road. It is total fun. And I grieve for our boys because they will never know what it was like to have a game controller with a 3.5-foot cord that was attached to an actual console with just 2 buttons and little direction arrows to move your person. You would try to wheel it and flip that cord as if it would figure out what they're doing. They'll never know that. So they have this experience of the virtual driving. Watching them learn how to drive early on was rather comical. They had a hard time keeping their little driver right in the middle of the road. When they would turn left or they would turn right, they would just turn too much and their guy would end up in the weeds, or they would fall off the road into some abyss. And sometimes as they were moving and they saw that they were going too far, they would overcorrect, and they would end up on the other side of the road or falling into the opposite ditch. It took some time for them to begin to master the art of driving in Super Mario Kart world, and now they rarely fall off the road anymore. For Susan and me, it's a different experience. Following Jesus is a bit like keeping your character in the middle of the road. Turn too hard to the left or too hard to the right, and you end up in the weeds. Overcorrect your behavior, and you end up stuck on the other side. We're on week 3 of our Tempted sermon series, and we look at the second empty suggestion of the devil to Jesus in the wilderness. He suggests that Jesus bow down and worship him and serve the devil. And if he does that, he could gain all the power over all the nations of the world. Last week, we heard how we can resist the temptation to provide for ourselves by seeking God through prayer and generosity. We live by God's word alone and not just the bread that we provide for ourselves. Today, we watch as the devil tempts Jesus with the power from the kingdoms of the world. He leads Jesus up a tall hill and gives him the vision of all the kingdoms. I like how the King James Version said it for us this morning. He shewed him the visions of all the kingdoms. Not shew, like, get away, but he showed to Jesus the vision of all the kingdoms of the world. And the devil says that if Jesus were only to bow down and worship him, then all of their power and all of their glory that comes with them would be his. Now, many a person after and before Jesus have given into this temptation. They may not have been given the chance to rule over all of the kingdoms of this world, but the devil presents an empty promise to rule over smaller kingdoms. Think of the kingdom of yourself, or the kingdom of family, or the kingdom of work, or the kingdom of your social network. These kingdoms don't have defined territories, but each of them presents an opportunity to gain some power and glory in life. How do we know when we've bought into this temptation? We start serving the devil with our thoughts and actions. Jesus shows us that the devil tends to think small, is small-minded devil. There's a situation with Jesus and the disciples later on in his ministry that shows us what Jesus means when he says that the devil thinks small. When Peter announces that Jesus is the Messiah, and Jesus says, "You are correct, I am the Messiah," and then begins to tell Peter and the rest of the disciples what the Messiah must do, that the Messiah must go to Jerusalem, that the Messiah must suffer, die, and then be raised again 3 days later. Peter looks at Jesus and says, "No, there's no way you as the Messiah will do that. You've got it all wrong." The Messiah, according to Peter and the disciples, should throw out the Romans and reestablish Israel as a sovereign nation. They want a bloody revolution. But Jesus looks at Peter and says, "Get behind me, Satan. Get behind me, Satan. For you are thinking of earthly things, things of humans, and you are not thinking like God." Peter is thinking with a small mind. The devil thinks with a small mind. Jesus has bigger aims. It's not just the souls in Israel's at that time that he's concerned about. He's concerned about the souls of all of humanity, past, present, and future. Jesus is thinking big. And I think Jesus must have laughed a little bit when the devil presented him all the kingdoms of the world and said that all their power and glory would belong to him if only he would kneel and serve the devil. Jesus came to reign over the kingdom of heaven, which is so much more than the kingdoms of this world. The kingdom of heaven is bigger than earth. It is the entire cosmos. Jesus can control space and time in this kingdom. He has much bigger goals than what the devil presents to him. And this is why I think Jesus is able to look the devil square in the eye and say, "No." He says no to the silly suggestion to bow down and worship him. The only thing worth worshiping, Jesus says, is God. There are two traps that we fall into when we are serving God. Just like our kids learning how to keep their little drivers in the middle of the road in that video game, the Holy Spirit works to keep us in the middle of the road of how we serve God well. Because if we don't, we can either fall into the ditch of consumer Christianity or the ditch of fundamentalism, which is on each side of us. Consumer Christianity is one of the biggest traps of our day and age that the devil lays for us. Consumer Christianity is being what I call a cultural Christian. You're Christian in name, but not really in action. You wear the clothing, you talk the talk, but when it comes to your actions, there is no discernible difference between you and someone else who doesn't follow Jesus. Cultural Christians are the ones who consume the religious goods and services that the church provides. You show up to church and you expect it to meet your needs, but you rarely pitch in to help with God's needs in the world. You treat church as if you're eating out at a restaurant or shopping at a retail shop. If you get any kind of bad service that doesn't meet your needs, then you shop other churches to find one that fits your style. You try to fit worship into your schedule instead of trying to fit your schedule to worship. You're okay with the fact that 20% of the people do 80% of the work. You rest on the few years that you had in your childhood Sunday school experience, and you don't see the need to nurture your faith or grow through groups. There's no sacrifice in your part of how you serve God as a consumer Christian. When Jesus quotes Deuteronomy 6:13 and says, "We shall serve the Lord our God alone," He doesn't mean that one can serve God part-time. You can't serve God with just part of your week, or part of your time, or part of your talent, or part of your wealth, or part of your heart, or part of your soul, or part of your mind, or part of your strength. You get where I'm going with this? When you serve God with all, and not just some. You pledge to love the Lord your God with all of your heart, with all of your soul, with all of your mind, and all of your strength. You pledge to love the Lord your God with your bank account, in your career, with how you parent your children, and how you treat your spouse, with how you spend your time, and with how you vote, with how you tip your wait staff at restaurants, and where you choose to park in the parking lot. You choose to serve God with what you put in your body and what you post on your social media accounts, with what kind of friends you keep and how you act toward those who are struggling in life. You choose to serve the Lord your God with all. Because Jesus knows that when you stop serving God, you start serving something else, whether that be yourself or some lesser god that's out there. And when you do this, you fall into the ditch of small-minded thinking. When you were baptized into the grace of Jesus Christ. And your every breath and your every step after you exit out of those waters of grace is done in service to our Lord who gave all, who died on the cross so that you could think and dream bigger than what is offered to us every day. Worship the Lord your God and serve only him, Jesus says. He means to find your identity in his grace. Find your identity in God's grace and not in what your latest job review says, or what your teenager yelled at you across the house, or what your neighbor is complaining about, or what the latest thing the media is trying to get us all outraged about. Find out who you are in what I've done for you, Jesus says. And then live from that. Get out of the ditch of consumer Christianity and join me on the road of service to God. It's easy for us to pick ourselves up out of that ditch and then to overcorrect and end up in the other side of the road, in the weeds over there. And over there, I like to call that the ditch of fundamentalism. Fundamentalism is a wet blanket on thought. It traps a person down in many rules and regulations, so much so that one can hardly have a thought on her own. Fundamentalism seeks to order all of life, every single aspect. Its intentions are good, to serve God always, but its execution misses the mark. Jesus operated around a bunch of fundamentalists who accused him constantly of breaking their religious laws. The laws help people understand if they were in right standing with God or not. And at times, Jesus could seem like he was quite flippant with them. One time in his ministry, Jesus and his disciples were caught eating grain from a field on the Sabbath day. And you were not allowed to pick grain, to do a little bit of harvesting of grain on the holy day of worship. And lots of accusations were made about Jesus and his disciples for being ones who were unconcerned about God's laws. When Jesus simply asked, is the Sabbath made for humans or humans made for the Sabbath? His point was that following God shouldn't become so much work that we miss the ultimate goal, that of enjoying a full relationship with God that leads to abundant life. I grew up in a land of fundamentalists, and from them I learned that God was a God of great judgment and that I better watch my step every time. Not only should I watch it, but I better tell everyone to watch their steps as well, or else. Fundamentalists tend to be rather judgmental and joyless people. They're not a lot of fun to be around. And it wasn't until a couple of friends of mine in college finally shared something significant going on in their lives with me that I realized that I was serving Jesus in this ditch. When I asked my friends why they hadn't shared their news earlier, I was the last one to find out. They said, Paul, we were afraid of how you would respond to us. Ouch. Here I thought I was offering them good news, but they were afraid of my reaction, and consequently, they were afraid of God's reaction as well. What Jesus says, to serve and worship God always, he doesn't mean to do so in a manner that gives off only vibes of judgment and doom and gloom. Jesus comes to give us hope and not the hammer. Giving into the devil's temptation of power is about adopting small-minded thinking. It's about seeing scarcity instead of abundance around us. It puts barriers around God's grace that makes it really hard for people to access God. And it cheapens God's grace by not taking our service very seriously and sacrificing anything in our life for God's kingdom. Jesus, so far as I know, was the only one who was able to keep himself in the middle of the road of how best to serve God. And he did this by adopting the heart of a servant. He humbled himself. He emptied himself of his right to power. And he acted based on his vision of the bigger things that God was up to in life. He took up the towel and he washed the dirtiest parts of his friends. He made room at his table for those who were excluded by society and their shame. He made things simple in his service. Love God, love your neighbor. He held fundamentalists accountable by showing them how small their kingdoms were, and he offered a chance at real life to those who were just dialing it in, who were simply going through the motions. And by doing these things, he showed the devil what real power in life is like. It's not about controlling groups of people who end up serving you and your agenda so that you can further your ego in life. It's about showing people a different vision of life where all can flourish together. And to get them to that new place, you love them to the end. And that kind of love is the strongest force on earth. It's natural to struggle in how we serve God. It's hard to keep ourselves in the middle of the road, but by the power we're giving in our baptisms, we have the Spirit of Jesus that helps to keep us in the center of the road. We have the promise of forgiveness when we fall into either ditch, and we have the opportunity to start again right in the middle of that road. I love how in the video game, when you fall off into the abyss, a little cloud picks you up and puts you right back in the center to try it all again. My prayer for you today is to be captivated by the big thinking of Jesus so that you may think, dream, and serve big. And in your serving, may others see the goodness of God shining through you. Amen.